Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Stephen Bulldrek, and this is my video log for November 23rd, 2015. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about what I've been up to, and one of those things has been watching the Netflix series from Marvel, Jessica Jones. Um, I've said in an earlier blog that I'm not a big fan of the darker, grittier uh, comic properties. That's not entirely true. While I do prefer lighter, more optimistic superheroes and superhero stories, they're not by nature bad if they go a little darker. And I think the important thing for them is to be faithful to the source material and the source character. Superman going dark doesn't work for me because Superman is not a dark character. He's not the Punisher. He's not this angsty, brooding superhero. He shouldn't be. He is supposed to be optimistic. He is supposed to represent hope. Superman is a character that should be an inspiration, not something to be feared. At least not if you're sane. Um, so I was really disappointed with Man of Steel. Some people loved it, and that's cool. It's just, like I said, it wasn't what I wanted from the character. Same thing, I'm not a big fan of the ultra broody Dark Knight for Batman. Not a big fan of the Nolan movies for similar reasons. Batman works a little bit better, but Batman, I mean, I grew up with more Silver Age Batman. The old Super Friends cartoons, Batman and Robin meets Scooby-Doo, reading some of those old crazy Silver Age Batman stories when I was really little. So my impression of Batman is maybe a little bit different than a lot of people's. So I appreciate the goofier Batman a little bit more. That said, I think Batman does work more serious, but there has to be a limit to it. I think like the Justice League cartoons and the Batman animated series, and Batman Brave and the Bold especially, really, I think did a great job with it. Because that Batman was a more serious Batman, but it was a Batman with a sense of humor. It was a Batman who didn't live in this dark, dreary, gritty world. And more importantly, I think Batman is an interesting character because Batman works as a serious character because he's bouncing off of these really colorful four-color villains. Your non-Christopher Nolan Joker, the Mark Hamill Joker especially, your Catwoman, your Poison Ivy, Harley. All of these characters they're just outlandish characters, very four-color, very just boom out there. And I think Batman works as a contrast to them. So that's an area where he really works. Superman doesn't have that as much. Superman's villains tend to be a little more serious, so he works as a lighter, hopefuler character. Spider-Man, on the other hand, just a jokey, wisecrack character. More serious, more angsty Spider-Man doesn't work for me. That was probably my only complaint with a couple of the Spider-Man movies from Sam Raimi, was that occasionally Spider-Man dipped down into that angst. Although that's also been a large part of the character for a long time. He's always been that weighted with responsibility thing. You got to be careful not to take it too far, which some writers have done in the past in the comics. So, that worked. But anyways, back to Jessica Jones. Jessica Jones and Daredevil before it worked because these are more serious characters. And more importantly, Jessica Jones right out of the gate was a Marvel Max title, which was their adult line, which basically meant they could swear. And have their characters doing things that wouldn't be appropriate for their all ages books. Although they usually didn't go too far. This wasn't like suddenly a porn comic or anything. And Alias, the comic that Jessica Jones is based on, was definitely a more serious comic. Um, and a lot of what was in the series is in the comic as well. So I was okay with the more serious, grittier, down to earth nature for Jessica Jones. I think it also was appropriate because one of the things they wanted to do with this was make it more film noir, your classic detective story type characters. And that I think worked as well. That was a point in his favor as well. So overall, I think it worked. Now I'm going to start getting into spoiler territory. So if you haven't seen Jessica Jones yet, I would suggest going and watching that, and then coming back and maybe listening to the rest of this video. Otherwise, I may spoil some of the twists to it. So you've been warned. So okay, they made a whole bunch of changes for Jessica Jones from the comic book, and I'm going to kind of discuss a few of those here because some of them are important. Some of them, there are very, very valid reasons for why they changed them. Some of the stuff just didn't work as much. But there's one change that I was a little disappointed with, and we'll cover that here in a minute. So the first up, you have a slightly different cast of characters. In Alias, Jessica Jones, the character she's set in an already existing Marvel universe. But it's a Marvel universe that's much more open, much more established than the Marvel Cinematic Universe. In the MCU, most of the superhero stuff still isn't public, and there isn't a whole lot of it. Daredevil has just started acting. You get a nice little crossover with that, wherein Claire Temple, I think her name was, the nurse from Daredevil, where she crosses over and she mentions that she knows somebody who has powers. So they established Daredevil. They mention not by name. They're kind of very round about it. But they kind of reference the Avengers, and they reference obviously the invasion of New York. They don't reference Age of Ultron, so I'm not entirely sure in the timeline where this show fits. They haven't really established if it's before Age of Ultron or after. Considering some of the stuff that happens in Age of Ultron, I would assume that it's before, but it's not really important either way. But regardless, the superpowered stuff isn't that well known. Only several of the Avengers are a known quantity. Most of the stuff from Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. has been under the table. Then there's obviously stuff starting to ramp up with that, with the Inhumans and the fish oil stuff storyline from that series that's infecting Inhumans as the Terrigen Mists. But it hasn't been it hasn't been something that's really been open and public yet. The government's working to keep it all under wraps and keep it secret. S.H.I.E.L.D's working to do that as well. So it's obvious that it's a setting where there are some superheroes, and the idea of superheroes is not completely unknown. But it's not a world where, Iron Man and Spider-Man are swinging by, and New York has 30,000 heroes, and the Avengers and 16 other super teams are a thing. So in the comics, it makes sense that she's a little more down to earth. It also means that you can't bring in some of the original supporting cast. Her best friend in the comic book was Carol Danvers, Miss Marvel, currently Captain Marvel. Since Captain Marvel has not been cast and they're planning to use her for a movie at some point, it makes sense that they couldn't use her for this series. So instead, we get Trish Walker, a.k.a. Patricia Walker, a.k.a. Patsy Walker, who is known in the Marvel Universe as Hellcat. Patsy Walker's an interesting character because she's been around since the, I think, 40s or 50s. She was one of those characters, she was one of those recurring, teen characters, kind of an Archie type character. Perpetual teen. I think she had a bunch of different things she did. She was part of some of the old Marvel romance comics back in the day, from before they were Marvel. I think she was part of, teen detective stories. So she had a lot of different roles. She was just this character that kind of got fit into different comics. Eventually she got brought into the proper Marvel Universe, And I'm not as familiar with that character. If I remember right, her teen hero, her teen stuff, is all considered comic books that was written by her mom or something like that, which is kind of works for the way they did it in the TV show with Trish being a child actor that was run by her mom. So that kind of works. And it'll be interesting. It's odd. They were kind of playing up with the idea that maybe she'll get a costume or something at some point down the line, because they show her learning a lot of like martial arts and learning self-defense. And at one point during the series, she actually basically takes this combat drug and beats the holy hell out of another character who's also kind of souped up on combat drugs. So that was pretty cool. It'll be really interesting to see what happens with that. The one disappointment, and this would have been a great crossover thing they could have done, but it also makes sense that they didn't because of the timing and everything, was in the comics she briefly dates Scott Lang, Ant-Man, who was played by Paul Rudd in the just recently released Ant-Man movie. So that could have been a great crossover opportunity as well, but again, it makes sense that they didn't, because obviously superheroes are just not a thing. There's not like this big superhero network. And more importantly, I don't think the tones would have fit well. With Jessica Jones being such a dark series, and Ant-Man was this heist comedy. So I don't think that would have worked nearly as well had they done it that way. So it makes sense there. Purple Man, a little disappointed he wasn't purple. But Tennant brings a really good performance for him. He was very creepy, did a great job, and his powers were spot on. Purple Man is a terrifying character. So props to them for doing that really, really well. I'm a little bummed they ended up killing him. It made sense for the show, and again, at the very end of the series, she snaps his neck, Superman style. And this is where my big contrast comes in, because I know I kind of sound a little bit like a hypocrite by being, oh, Superman shouldn't be snapping necks, and I really don't like dark superheroes, but then I'm like, hey, I love Jessica Jones. And again, that's because of the roots of the character, and because of how it played through. Throughout the series, Jessica makes a number of attempts to stop him without killing him. Partially because she's got selfish reasons. There's a girl she's trying to protect, and she needs to prove that Kilgrave, Purple Man, exists and has these powers, so that she can get her friend, this girl she rescues, off the hook for a couple of murders. If she just kills Purple Man, then this girl stays in prison for life. But there's also a couple of other points where she starts making a point to try to see if... at one point, after Purple Man threatens a bunch of people, she willingly goes and basically moves in with him for a little while. Because he's professing he's in love with her and everything, and so she's like... She figures, well, maybe I'll have a chance to... with great power comes great responsibility. Maybe I can teach him this. She takes a page out of Spidey's book. So she makes this attempt to sort of explain right and wrong to him. And of course it just horribly goes off rails and just does not work. So, and like I said, there's multiple attempts throughout the series for her to stop him without killing him. Or to try to change him. None of that works. And he just keeps killing people. Controlling people, and he's always got these contingency plans where, like, you do this to me and these people will do this, and etc., etc. And finally she manages to catch him unawares, and the only thing she can really do is kill him. And that made sense from the storytelling standpoint. It made sense narratively for the build-up, and ultimately this is a character that is a dark, abused, battered, beaten character. She's not the hero that Superman is. She's not a hero at all, really. She's taking steps to become one, but her previous attempts to become a hero had failed miserably, and so now she's just this ruin of a woman. So it also makes sense from a storytelling standpoint that this is what she would do. Oh, and Luke Cage was amazing. I cannot wait for the Luke Cage story, the series. I was a little hesitant when I first saw him. I was like, oh, I don't know if this guy will work. But it did. He played it great. I think he did a good job. I'm really interested to see what they'll do with the Luke Cage series. My one disappointment with the series is there was a phenomenal bit in the comics that I really, really liked. In the comics, he does much what he does here. He has her. He basically manages to take control of her, although he manages when she's in costume as a superhero. But either way, he manages to take control of her and keeps her with him for like 8 months and just basically is abusive towards her the entire time. However, they make a very specific point of saying in the comic that he never actually physically molests her. And again, this is going to be a little triggery, so I apologize. You may want to step out if this is an issue. But in the comics, he tells her that she wants him, which makes her want him. But he won't let her do anything, and he won't do anything. So there's this serious line of emotional torture that's involved there. And because when he tells you to do something, you do it, period. So he says, you want me, you love me, etc. She does. But in the... So I just thought that was just way nastier than him just actually basically raping her, which is what he does in the series. And I mean, don't get me wrong, that's terrible, that's vile, that's horrible, that should never happen. And I mean, there aren't punishments strong enough for people who do things like that. But I think it was actually darker the other way from a narrative standpoint. It's more terrible this way. So I don't know. I guess it was just a change that I wasn't expecting, and it caught me a little off guard, and I think I don't know. I'm not sure how that works. I like the comic version a little bit better, but it's also the one I know. So what can you say? Anyways, I love the series. I watched it as quick as like possible. It still took me a couple of days, but 3 days. But I think it was a great show, great episode, a great series. Marvel did a great job with it. So really happy with that. The visuals were fantastic. Like I said, they did a great job of making it this noir style, film noir thing. And I gotta go. Have a good one.